It's not letting me record a second time. All right, here we go. Hey, everybody, it's Mike Young, 54 years young with aPlantBasedDiet.org. I'm at our regenerative farm, and the season's over. But I get an opportunity here to talk with Dr. Peter Rogers, who we've done 2 other interviews with before. He always provides us with some thought-provoking information, usually brand new information. And today's talk is no different. It's a new subject that he is kind of delving into, which is food and mood. And he's got some new information for us, along with a presentation that we'll get to. I'm going to give some of my own comments and insights based on what he says. And of course, ask my own questions to Dr. Rogers. He's always full of knowledge. Welcome, Dr. Rogers.
Thanks. Hi.
Hey, all right. Well, you've got a presentation. You said you might write a new book on this subject as well, right?
Yeah, I've been quite interested in food and mood for a long time, and I've been doing more reading on it recently, and I got some new information I think people will find interesting.
All right. Well, that's definitely, because I've always recognized there's some sort of correlation between what you eat and your outlook or your internal thinking and your mood. So enlighten us however you can on this subject, please.
Okay. Should I start my slides?
Yes, please.
Okay. Let me go to my slides here, and then I got to share my screen.
It's a little bit of a,
Okay, you see my slides now?
I see them.
Yeah, it should be an orange book. Okay, so this is a book called Food and Behavior. The author's name is Barbara Stitt, and she was a probation officer going back to the 1960s. And she herself had some medical problems. She had terrible episodes of these, mood swings, of dysphoria, difficulty concentrating, dizziness, and she didn't understand what it was from. And she finally spoke with some persons who knew nutrition, and she was having rebound hypoglycemia repeatedly, like a roller coaster blood glucose curve. And the relevance of her learning to recognize it in herself was she realized this seemed to be a problem with a lot of her probationer clients. So she started putting them all, sending them to a nutritionist and testing their diets and, getting them onto a healthier diet. And the relevance is, she had the best probation record of any probation officer anywhere by far. Within 3 years, usually about 75% of the probationers get rearrested for a similar crime, versus for her, it was in the ballpark of only 11% at 10 years. So she became very well known amongst everybody in the court community for her incredible results. And that was the main thing she did. She just got them more and more towards plant-based diets. And the biggest thing was she got him off the processed food. She still would let him eat some meat, but she got him off the processed food. She said almost all of her probationers, who had been arrested were all junk food junkies. And also a lot of them had problems with alcoholism. So you get them off the junk food, you get them off the alcohol, and they're quite unlikely to end up getting back in trouble. These are some books that came out in the early 1970s. The Feingold diet. This Ben Feingold guy was a pediatric allergist. And he recognized if you take kids off the processed food with all the preservatives and the food dyes, they have a dramatic improvement in their behavior. And, hyperactivity was sort of the code word for what we now call attention deficit. So he had very good results with that. And a lot of these preservatives, they'll have a short name, red number 40, yellow number 5. Quite often, they're very complex petroleum chemicals. These are just euphemisms. And excess simple sugars. This is a book by Robert Thayer about categories of mood. And basically where you want to be is around here most of the day. You're calm, sort of positive, optimistic, but you still have good energy. And at night, you're still calm but tired. That's kind of where you ideally would like to be. Where you don't want to be is too tense and stressed out and negative and pessimistic and anxious. Sometimes that'll be appropriate to the moment, but in general, you want to try to get in this context. Another thing, too, is it's very much like the Yerkes-Dodson curve of peak performance. You need a little bit of stress to energize you, more like enthusiasm, welcoming the challenge for whatever it is that you want to do. If you don't have any stress or anything to motivate you, then you're kind of tired and lethargic. If you have too much stress, then you're distressed, anxious, and you're kind of overloaded. So you want to do whatever it takes to get you into the zone, so to speak, for optimal performance. This is interesting here. It's a sort of the 4-quadrant matrix. It's called the stupidity matrix of Cibola or the wisdom matrix of Cibola. And basically out of these 4 quadrants, most Americans are in what I would call the chump category. They're ignorant and they're passive. You know, they mean well, but they get screwed over and ripped off. They get tricked into, for example, tricked into eating a high-fat, partly processed food diet, and they all plug up their arteries. I mean, if you just told me a patient's 60 years old, I wouldn't even look at the chart. I would just assume they're pre-diabetic or diabetic, they're overweight, they've got fatty liver, they're hypertensive, they got coronary artery disease, cerebral vascular disease, and they're impotent. No need to look at the chart. I can tell you that is almost always correct. And so basically they just...
You see that, but you're 60 years old, so you don't have to have any of those issues, right?
Right. I'm 60 years old. I don't take any pills. I don't have any of those medical problems. None, zero. Yeah, anybody, you know, low-fat vegan, the medical system doesn't like low-fat vegans because they don't make any money off us. But they like to keep the population eating, you know, high-fat diets with all the oils and the processed food because it makes them fat, sick, and stupid. It's easy to take their money away. And so these people, basically, they're good people, but they're a bunch of chumps. That's most Americans, all right? The next category right here is also ignorant. So that was ignorant and passive. The next category is ignorant and aggressive. And this is the worst quadrant because they're stupid, they're aggressive, they're lose-lose. They mess up their own life and they mess up other people's lives too. So you just want to avoid them. They're the worst quadrant, okay? Then the other quadrant over here is what we call sort of smart and wise, but evil. You know, they don't have good intentions. Their attitude is, and I believe this kind of goes back to atheistic Darwinism viewpoint on life. And this is actually the standard accepted viewpoint of, this is really the American national religion, is what I would call atheistic Darwinism. The idea that this is what is taught in the high schools, in the biology class, in the college and grad school biology classes, that humans are just a primate like chimpanzees, but they talk. That's it. They have no soul. There's nothing special about humans. There's nothing divine about them. And anyways, the reason I mention this is a lot of the big money players and the big corporations, you know, big pharma and all this, their attitude is how can they get their money, and they don't care about anyone else. So, you know, they'll give attention deficit kids, so-called attention deficit kids, amphetamine. So what if it ruins the kid and hurts them? They get their money. So they're a win for themselves and a lose for you. And the best quadrant to try to be in is the win-win quadrant, where you do what's best for yourself, but you also try to help people. And the more society is in this quadrant, the better off everybody is. And I'm kind of a believer that you have to have a Bible-based worldview if you're ever going to fix healthcare and health in general and food quality, because there's so much money to be made by ripping people off that unless you really value the individual very highly, why bother with it? Let's say somebody has coronary artery disease. You get $30,000 for each stent. You get $150,000 for open heart surgery. What do you get for teaching the vegan diet? You know, nothing to $1,000. Why would anybody do that unless you really cared for the individual? And atheistic Darwinism says they're just a talking monkey. No one cares about talking monkeys.
That makes sense, Dr. Rogers. Sounds like you need a reason that's bigger than yourself to do the right thing.
That's why parents are the best people in the world for a child. A lot of parents are ignoramuses, but they love that child and they will do the best they can and they will learn, and you could count on them that they're going to do the best they can for the kid. And that's more important. I would trust a kid with an illiterate mother and father a lot more than I would trust him with a Harvard doctor. He's going to pump them full of amphetamines. Then the Harvard doctors have declared that children don't just have attention deficit. They also have bipolar, and they often need a second medication, perhaps a third medication. You know, it's against the law to sell amphetamines to somebody on a street corner, but they give them to young children. It's insane. It's crazy. It's nonsense. But nobody can speak up against it because people are, too weak. Okay. And the people who could, they don't do it. So I'm sorry, but money runs things. And basically, there's an old saying from the book Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis. He said, in every deal, there's always two partners and a chump. And if you don't know who the chump is, then the chump is you. And so basically, the patient is the chump. The big drug company and the big fancy medical centers and the insurance companies, they're all in a partnership to make money. And somebody has to get chumped, and it's the patient. Okay, the next thing is soteria. Soteria is a Greek word. It means deliverance. And this comes out of the work of Loren Mosher. He was the head of the NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, way back in the 1970s. And he had noticed that the schizophrenics seem to do better if you don't put them on any medications and you just leave them at home. So he set up a residential facility initially in the San Francisco area, then in some other locations. The same data was repeated. What they found out was if you leave the schizophrenics in a residential setting with some supervision to help them along initially, 85% of them can return to regular life where they could return to live at home and get a job, often get married and have kids and everything. Versus if you put them right on antipsychotics and try to treat them with medications, only 15% are ever able to return to society. So dramatically improved results with a simple residential care setting. So this guy was like the most famous psychiatrist in all the USA. What do you think happened when he published these studies and showed how to help these patients? Do you think they offered him the Nobel Prize?
Probably ignored, right? Ignored them.
Oh, that would have been optimal. Instead, they declared that he was biased against drugs and they fired him.
Oh.
That's kind of how it goes.
Yes. So if you say something that's against the narrative, you get retaliated against. Is that right?
Oh yeah, you get retaliated against, ostracized. And so that's why I'm trying to say is there's no medical, surgical bullshitology, no technology. There's nothing that could fix healthcare other than to love the patient. And the only thing that can make you love the patient is that you say they are created in the image of God, therefore of intrinsic value, part divine as well as, part beast like the rest of us. And unless you have that, there's no incentive to fix anything. Why would, imagine you ran the system and you're making $1 billion a year and somebody says, oh, you're going to teach people this low-fat vegan stuff? How much money am I going to make with that? Oh, you'll only get, 1 million instead of $1 billion. They go, screw that. No way. Get out of here.
Another way, tell me if this is accurate, please. You're suggesting or telling me and others that really people need a moral obligation to do the right thing or to do the best thing they can for that patient, a moral obligation, right?
Yes. And it basically what I'm saying is the modern healthcare system is immoral. And anybody who denies that doesn't know what they're talking about. I've been in the system my whole life. My father's a doctor. I got a bunch of relatives that are doctors. I've been around this all my life. And I can tell you, I myself have been a doctor over 30 years. That there's no way around this. Like I said, the coronary artery disease management was just an obvious example, but it's the same, something similar for most other fields. The doctors simply are not trained in what I call NETs: nutrition, N for nutrition, E for epidemiology, T for toxicology, and S for all the stuff like sleep, sedentary versus exercise and all that kind of stuff, spirituality, religion, and all this other stuff, stress and all that. So anyway, here's a paper that's kind of funny. This is almost like a comic book paper. They recommend Prozac, the big famous antidepressant drug, for possible chemotherapy. Antidepressant fluoxetine, that's its scientific name, induces necrosis by energy depletion and mitochondrial calcium overload. Okay, why do I find this funny? Because back in the 1980s and early 1990s, there was this irrational exuberance for Prozac. It was the greatest thing in the world. My father was a psychiatrist, and he was a good guy. Did the best he could, but he's kind of conformist in his thinking, just accepted whatever came down from the Ivy Leagues and the other big famous places. And I remember as a joke, my mom said she had a friend of hers who was sad. So she took a bunch of my dad's free samples of Prozac and gave them to her friend. She goes, oh, now she's doing better. And I know that's kind of a crazy story, but it tells you how people thought about Prozac back in that time. They thought, oh, it was like candy. It's magic.
I remember the thing around that time was your happy pills, right? Those were your happy pills.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what my mom thought it was. Oh, my friend is sad. I will give her some happy pills. They have no idea this is a major toxic drug, and they want to use it now for chemotherapy. That's how toxic it is. So I thought that was funny. Here's a book written by a psychiatrist by the name of Grace Jackson. She went through all the papers on the side effects of antidepressants and other psychiatric medicines, and she basically says they cause a lobotomy. Drug-induced dementia is what she calls it. And she's not the only one. A lot of the most famous psychiatrists, the best one who ever lived was a guy named Bregan. And he said exactly the same thing. And the other thing I think is funny, they always try to wow the public with all this craziness. So the latest treatment for refractory, medicine non-responsive depression is to cut a hole in the skull, a craniotomy, and place an electrical wire down deep into the basal ganglia, and then run some electricity through it. They call it transcranial magnetic stimulation. And what I'm saying is this is insane, okay? You're going to crack a person's skull because they're sad. And now they're going to tell you, well, they failed drugs, they failed electroshock. And I would say, well, what about all this other stuff? How about fixing their diet, avoiding toxins, exercise, all this standard stuff? And here's the joke. You go to a psychiatrist and what are you offered? 3 different flavors of lobotomy. The drugs end up slowly causing a chemical lobotomy. You can go for electroshock and electrical lobotomy. You really want somebody running random powerful currents through your brain with unknown, unpredictable destruction. Surgical lobotomy, cut out part of your brain or put that crazy electrical wire in there. Run for your life. What I'm trying to tell you is the public just assumes that everything in conventional medicine is standardized and scientific, rather than if you actually understand it, it's insane. Because you don't understand it, you think it's okay.
Yeah, Dr. Rogers, are you saying that somebody has a diagnosis of a mental illness that they're just going to get some type of a lobotomy? That's the only treatment that's available?
What I'm saying is that conventional psychiatry, as it is practiced, is insane. It's crazy. And I would also tell you that people assume that medicine is based on science and outcomes. It is not. Anything that doesn't make money doesn't get into the journals. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes,
could you imagine if I wrote the article about, and I said that the way to get better was to, go on a Christian missionary? Okay, they would never publish that. Okay, and I'm not saying that that's the best either, but I'm making the point is you can immediately sense something like that would never get published. Okay, here's like a crazy story. What did you learn today in school, Janie? My teacher said it's none of your business, and my new name is Jake. And what I'm joking about is this type of craziness is approved, but other things are not. Some of the things, going back to that guy's book on mood, Robert Thayer, you make yourself happier exercising, but I'm not that impressed by anything that comes out of the universities because, like I said, people don't understand, but they are religion-based. They really are what I would call atheistic Darwinism. And once you start saying that mankind has no soul and he's just a talking monkey, you sort of degraded him. If you look at the point of view, the Bible-based point of view, he is created in the image of God. You're saying he's part divine, he's part godlike, okay? That he is intrinsically valuable, intrinsically worthwhile. His life intrinsically has some meaning. It's a sign of respect for him, okay? And that's another thing I'm going to say. And people don't like it when you talk about religion. Well, too bad, because what I'm trying to tell you is without religion, you cannot have high-quality medicine. And believe me, I know it better than anyone else. And people may not like it, but that's the truth. And the reason it's the truth is because...
Yeah, I have something to add to this, this exact point that you're bringing up. I know I've had conversations with people that say, like people who have medical issues, who say that they are Christian. And I know what denomination they are. And I say, well, your faith teaches that it is not allowable or sinful behavior to purposely harm someone or harm yourself. Isn't that a factor? And most people, even in that, have a trouble with it. So I'd say even within the religious space, right, people struggle with, even if they acknowledge that's the case, trying to follow through because, like you said, it's so unpopular. That's the thing. If more people
Right. I hear what you're saying, and they're a little bit separate issues. What I'm talking about is to value the patient, and it's really, consistent with what Ayn Rand had said. What Ayn Rand said was the most important rights are the rights of the individual, because if you guarantee individual rights, you guarantee all the other rights. And I agree with that. So what I'm basically saying is the reason why conventional medicine cannot fix itself is because it doesn't value the individual. Basically,
yes,
if you think a patient is a talking monkey and of no intrinsic value, and you can get $150,000 for treating them one way versus $1,000 for treating them another way, open heart surgery versus teaching them the vegan diet, even though the vegan diet works essentially 100% of the time based on Caldwell Essenson's research, 99.4%. The one patient who failed was the one who didn't follow the diet. Versus open heart surgery, zero increase in longevity. Stents, zero increase in longevity, unless it's in the setting of an acute myocardial infarction. So what I'm saying is we always choose the treatment that doesn't work. And why do we do it? Because it pays a lot of money. And we're always going to choose the bad treatment because they pay money. There's another saying too, if you cure a patient, you lose a customer. So you cannot fix something that doesn't want to be fixed. And I can assure you, it does not want to be fixed because the money comes from drugging the patient, surgerizing them, sending them for unnecessary tests. That's where the money comes from. Now, there's other things that can help a person,
Yes. Well, let me add to that what you just said. I also kind of bring together, I had mentioned earlier about that I see people that won't even do the right thing that they know. It's because of what you just said. It's because the doctors aren't saying, this is the best thing for this patient. This is the best I can do. I need to take care of this person. I'm going to teach them about a low-fat vegan diet, but they don't say that. Like you said, that's what's missing. Because if the doctor even hinted at that, then the patients would follow through even on their own religious beliefs. And I see that they question them because the doctors don't deliver that message you're saying.
Well, what I'm basically saying is the entire system runs on atheistic Darwinism, okay? And the unspoken assumption is that the patient is a moron, okay? It always is that way. And the reason is everything goes by standard of care. And people think, oh, standard of care, that sounds good. They don't understand. Standard of care means lowest common denominator. It means the patient is a moron, as stupid as a dog, and they're not capable of doing anything intelligent, of learning anything, or of helping themselves. All they can do is take a pill like you would give to a dog. Okay, that's what standard of care means. And the doctors have to go by it because as long as they go by it, they can't be sued because they followed the standard. They will get paid by the insurance company, so they generate their billing code, they make money, and it's fast. So it's a great deal for the doctor. It's a great deal for the insurance company. It's a great deal for the drug company, but the patient gets screwed. And the patient's always going to be the one that gets screwed because they're an ignoramus and they don't understand what's happening. And what I'm saying is the only thing that could fix it is that somebody loves that poor patient and does what's right for them, even though they lose money. And they're not going to do that with the current system. No way. The way a medical system works, there's always a bean counter. Every single hospital in the Western world, there's bean counters for everything, okay? And the bean counters keeping track of the billing codes. How much money is this doctor making? Let's say you have an internal medicine clinic and you've got 3 internal medicine doctors. If 2 of them practice the standard of care, they're going to see 30 patients a day and make a lot of money for the clinic, okay? Now, let's say you got some doctor who thinks they know what they're doing and they start teaching the patients about vegan diet. They're only going to see about 10 patients per day, and a lot of that stuff's not going to get reimbursed. And if they didn't follow the standard of care, they might be open to a lawsuit if the patient has a bad outcome. So from a money point of view, and it's a money business, it doesn't make sense to teach the low-fat vegan diet. It's a loser. So to do the right thing and help the patient means you get screwed financially, and the clinic's not going to stay in business if it does that. So they're going to tell the doc, they're going to tell them nicely at first, look, other docs in the group are seeing 30 patients a day. You're only seeing 10 patients a day. You're not pulling your weight. You're being lazy. And you better see 30 patients a day or we're going to have to let you go. That's it. So they have to go by. They really don't have a choice. And you could say, well, why don't they just teach them anyways? Well, if they do that, they're going to be there till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and they got to go home, eat dinner, and get back in the hospital by 7 in the morning the next day. They're just going to become exhausted, so they can't do it. Something has to give. They're either going to work part-time, which most of them don't want to do because they don't have enough money. So they're going to go full-time. They're going to be exhausted, and then they're going to say, screw it. And they're just going to go by standard of care. It's easier, it pays, and you can't get in trouble. Okay, so anyways, these are all additional things that make a person happy, you know, and give them a good mood and a good perspective on life, that they feel their life has meaning, that they live in a way that fulfills what they think is their most important purpose. Like for parents, you know, helping their kid, for example. If they are committed to some activity, whatever it might be, let's say a teacher, devoted to doing a good job as a teacher, it makes them happy to do whatever they think is their priorities in life. It's sort of like an animal is happy when it does what it's meant to do. A horse is happy when it runs, okay? Religion often makes people happy because they sort of turn over some of the responsibility and stress for their life to their deity. Other things that are pleasant, of course, exercise, reading a book, doing your hobby, your creative work, whatever it is. You know, these things are all good. Talk to a friend, share time with friends and family, you know, exercise, go for a walk, whatever. Spend time in nature.
Doctor, the more of those, the better, right? The more of those, the better.
Yeah. The more of these, the better. And for each individual, I think, you know, it's been said by some psychiatrists that what makes happiness in the long run is a sense of meaning and purpose in one's life. And, you know, different people have said it different ways. For example, Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, he said, forget about trying to have a happy life. Try to have a heroic life. Because if you try to have a heroic life, you will act in concert with what you feel is best for you to do. And then you respect yourself, so you're relatively happy. And, Thomas Shaw is the famous psychiatrist, the guy who wrote The Myth of Mental Illness. He said the same thing. He said, meaning is what brings happiness. Viktor Frankl, a person can survive any how if they have a why. Okay. And Dostoevsky said essentially the same thing. If you have a purpose, you can endure much more. Nietzsche, he said the same thing. And it's pretty clear and well known. That makes you more resilient. You're like, well, I have to put up with all these painful irritants, but I'm doing something good, so it's worth it. So you feel it's worth it, and that gives you the energy to endure all the bad stuff that you have to endure.
Right. Makes sense.
Here's a diagram of what's called the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell. He wrote about, patterns of stories and in mythology and in other famous blockbuster stories. And the idea is you start out with a hero who lives at home, and they have their ordinary familiar world of childhood and adolescence and family. And then they get a call to action where they gradually depart to an unknown world, which could be going off to college. It could be going off to another place for a new job or whatever. And they often have a lot of setbacks, humiliations, and screw-ups initially. And then they have a low point. They start to bounce back. And they'll often go 2 steps up, get knocked back down, 2 steps up, get knocked back down. And I think, this is the story of the hero's journey in movies and books, but it's also the way a lot of our lives are. You keep making progress and you get knocked back down. So this can relate to, your financial career. It also relates to your health. So what I'm sort of saying with regard to relation to health is if you just eat the best possible diet, low fat, low sodium, vegan diet with no oils, avoid the junk food, the processed food, etc., you can primarily keep on moving up and improving your health relative to your age rather than, like a typical stupid person saying, well, I'm cutting down on olive oil, I'm cutting down on meat. People who do that, they go 2 steps up, 1 back down, 2 steps up, 1 back down, and then they often have a big setback. They often long-term, they don't do well because as you get older, you get fragile. You just get more fragile as you get older. So the more you have to keep your act together and improve your diet, nutrition, avoidance of toxins, or you end up kind of screwed up. I see that all the time. Oh, so-and-so is making progress. But they only go halfway. And when you get older, man, you're over 50 years, you better go all the way or you might not make it. Because to me, the average person's fat, sick, and stupid. The average person over 50, I see them all the time. And, the sooner they turn it around, the better. Because as they get older, if they still remain clueless and ignorant, the less likely it is they're ever going to learn, they're ever going to have the motivation, the energy, the gumption to turn it around. So you got to want it. It doesn't happen by accident.
Dr. Rogers, it's a limited time you have, right? Because once you reach a certain level of illness in your body, it just begins to shut down. That's kind of how I describe it, right? The body gives up at some point. You don't know where that is.
Right. You don't know where you've reached that point of no return, and you better try to avoid it as best you can, or you just fall into this thing like you're rolling like a snowball down the hill, collecting more diseases and more medications. And what I've noticed, a lot of these old people, when I say old, I mean people over 60, they're just sort of like too ignorant and stupid that you really can't help them. Look, as a doctor, I don't got a lot of time. I'll try to say a few nice words to them, say something to help them, but I can tell you the vast majority of the time they don't get it. Their eyes glaze over, and they say things like, I'd rather die than stop eating meat. You want to take away my ice cream? I love my ice cream. That's one of the few things in life that I enjoy. I know it's genetic because my sister and my brother both had to have open heart surgery too. And I'm like, it's because you guys all eat the same thing. Don't call it genetic. Once you call it genetic, you're saying it's impossible to get better. If you put yourself into that category, you will never get better.
Hey, Dr. Rogers, the way you describe it is the way I've seen, some people as they get old, they kind of decide in their mind that their life is pretty much over. They've done whatever they're going to do. And it seems like that creates a bad mood in their mind, just that method of thinking.
Right. They sort of say, well, when my time comes, it comes. And they also say things like, I want to enjoy life. I go, there's nothing to enjoy about being a fat, sick, hypertensive, diabetic on stacks of medications who's going broke. It'll put you into poverty pretty fast, having endless medical problems. Like I said, I'm 60. I don't take any pills. Nothing wrong with me. Everything works.
That's
I like
great.
being
Actually,
healthy.
when I say to people, when people say that, I say, well, if you want to enjoy life, but the real enjoyment in life is going out and doing whatever you want at any time. And you can't do that if you're sick. That's the thing.
Yeah. Being sick limits you. So here is the sodium-potassium pump in the plasma membrane of any cell. Neurons especially they devote like half to 2/3 of their energy to running this pump. So potassium is brought into the cell, sodium is pumped out of the cell, and ATP is required to run this pump. Magnesium is required to get ATP to work correctly. And then this generates an electrical battery of energy, and the cell uses this energy to pump other things wherever it wants them to go. Like it needs to pump calcium out to shut off cell activation. And so it allows sodium to come into the cell because you have a negative electrical gradient of negative 65 millivolts. And that's because you brought in 2 positive charges while you pumped out three positives. So you end up with a net negative inside. Also, you'll have a concentration gradient where the sodium concentration outside the cell is much higher than it is inside the cell. So it's an electrical chemical gradient, and you can couple things to pumping other things out. And that's how cells work. So basically, the cell is brilliant. I mean, it invented an electrical battery in its wall back at the beginning of life on Earth. In the old days, our ancestors ate about 20-25 times as much potassium as sodium. Whereas nowadays, it's about the opposite. People routinely eat 15 times more sodium than potassium. So they mess up all those gradients because the body will urinate out a lot of the potassium when you have excessive consumption of sodium from these high salt diets, which is a lot of processed food, for example. To some extent with meat too, because it is a preservative and a flavorant for meat. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is unless you get your potassium intake about 5 times higher than your sodium, you're probably going to have problems with hypertension, and you're going to have all kinds of other problems with your plasma membrane. You're going to be suboptimally functioning.
Okay, Dr. Rogers, I wanted to add that my wife and I were looking at some supposedly plant-based prepared meals today, and they were calling themselves low sodium. And I looked at the sodium levels. I'm like, wait a minute, I can't just go on the low sodium tagline for this. It looks like prepared meals. It looked like not junk food. It looked like not processed food. But then I got down to the sodium, and it was at least 1-to-1, if not 2-to-1 ratio of sodium to calories, which is going to get you way above the maximum level for the day. And so I want to warn people, watch out for that language. It's not true.
Yeah, it sounds like they're using it as a preservative in part. It's a flavorant too, and it's a preservative, but it's not as healthy as you'd want. Yep. Here's a neuron. Here's the cell body. These are the dendrites for incoming information up in here. This is the beginning of the axon, which connects the cell body to the axon terminal. The beginning of the axon is called the axon hillock. An action potential will begin here. That means an electrical message being transmitted down this thing like an electrical wire. This is the fatty coating of the nerve called myelin, and it speeds up conduction. The synaptic cleft is the dividing space between the pre and the postsynaptic neuron. NT is for neurotransmitters. Once this neuron's activated, these will merge with the plasma membrane. The neurotransmitter is released across the synaptic cleft, binds to the postsynaptic neuron, and exerts an effect. Here's what it is with a little more detail. So let's say incoming information activates this neuron to fire an action potential. The action potential begins at the axon hillock, transmitted by sodium channels down the axon. Once it reaches here, you now have a more positive membrane charge because of all these positive sodiums that came in. That will activate this channel here. This is called VGCC, voltage gated calcium channel. That lets calcium come into the cytoplasm of the axon terminal. Elevated calcium causes release of the neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter travels to the cleft and it'll diffuse across. And that's how our brains send messages. That's basic neurophysiology. Here is a little more detail on a cell. We talked about the potassium sodium pump. We talked about always needing ATP for it. We talked about how pumping calcium out of the cell is coupled to this. Knockout exchanger, Na means natrium, for a Latin word for sodium. Ka means calcium, for calcium. By the way, K is for kalium. That means potassium. You can also remember P for potassium, P for plants. Okay, so anyways, when you have elevated calcium inside the cell, it will activate the cell to do whatever cells do. If you're talking about neurons, brain cells, it'll be to release a neurotransmitter like glutamate and do as we just showed. When you want to turn this message off, you're going to have to pump that calcium out. And the cell uses the same electrical battery effect based on this pump. And again, 2/3 of the cell neuron's energy go to this pump. It does that, uses that energy to pump all kinds of other things as well. Okay, so this is just showing whatever the cell, pineal gland will secrete melatonin, a mast cell will secrete histamine, a pancreas will secrete insulin, a skeletal muscle will contract. Whenever calcium comes up in the cell cytoplasm, it's like an aristocrat. Think of potassium, sodium, magnesium. Those are all the manual labors, minimum wage manual labors. Calcium is the aristocrat. And it says, now do this. And the cell will do whatever it's supposed to do. The gradient of concentration outside the cell for calcium is like 15,000 times higher than it is inside the cell. And what that means is to pump against a high gradient, you always need ATP. That's going to be real important because if you need ATP, that means you need good mitochondria. Okay, here's why magnesium is important. Magnesium has got 2 positive charges. Now, here's an ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That's like a $20 bill in a cell for getting work done. So these phosphates, they want to bust apart because they have a big negative charge on them. So the magnesium, it's like holding on to 2 bucking Broncos. Wait, not yet, not yet. And then when the enzyme, positions it slightly differently, then it releases the phosphate. But you need the magnesium. And the reason I went into all that, magnesium is located right in the center of chlorophyll. Okay, so there's always magnesium in plants. But most people don't eat enough plants, so they're deficient in magnesium. Like, I don't know, I've heard different numbers, like 90% of the American population. Well, if you're deficient in magnesium, you're not going to run these ATP pumps too well. And these are the most important things in your brain cells. So you're going to be suboptimal in your function, Because sometimes, like, I'll talk to students, right, to help them prepare for their tests in college and grad school. And usually what I've seen is I'll talk to some students that are like top of the class, and I'll go, you should do this. And they're going to go, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. That's a great idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. Because I've written books on study skills. I was very into study skills when I was younger. I was first in my medical school class, and I spent a long time studying everything you could study about study skills. Versus when I talk to the students that are having a difficult time, they always say things to me like, no one else does that. That's weird. Why would I want to do that? What I'm trying to say is you want to do every little thing you can to optimize neuronal function. Why wouldn't you? All right. So bottom line, for all these ATP pumps, and you always need ATP to handle your calcium, you have to have magnesium. So you got to eat your plants, so you're not going to have optimal neuronal function. You got to have adequate amounts of potassium around to run these pumps, or you're not going to have optimal function. So this is what I'm saying is you're going to have improved cognitive performance just by eating a plant-based diet because you'll have more magnesium for your ATP reactions. You'll have more potassium for running all your pumps. So all your neurons will function more effectively. It's just guaranteed. We talked previously about the need for nitrate precursors to make nitric oxide, the vasodilator. So those come from your plants too, from your greens. So the good stuff, it's in plants. So is the antioxidants. That's just the way it is. I could care less about animal rights. I don't like people to be cruel to animals, but what I'm trying to say is I came to a vegan diet, plant-based nutrition based on health, not based on, personal philosophy or animal rights or any of this stuff. I just want to be healthy. If meat would make me healthy, I would eat it. Okay. And so what you're doing to get that calcium out of the cell, you got to have all these pumps working correctly. If these pumps are not working correctly, you can't get the calcium out of the cell. It will overactivate the cell and the cell will die. And that's actually a very common cause of neuronal death. This is actually my theory. I'm not going to go into it all right at this moment. The Peter Rogers supply and demand theory of neurodegeneration. So again, what basically happens is the glutamate neurotransmitter diffuses across synaptic cleft. It actually first binds with a receptor called the AMPA receptor. That lets a sodium channel. That raises the resting membrane potential. Instead of being negative 65 millivolts, it'll start moving it up to about negative 40 millivolts. As it becomes more positive, more close to zero, that's called depolarization. It's not so polarized. Then what happens is the magnesium that was sitting in the center of the other glutamate receptor called the NMDA receptor, it will bounce out because there's no longer a strongly negative charge to attract it. It's not able to go all the way through because of the shape of the receptor. This will cause the magnesium to bounce out. Once the magnesium bounces out, now calcium can come through this channel. Okay, and there's other things that can activate the NMDA receptor. For example, glycine can activate it. And you think about glycine phosphate, glyphosate, which is sprayed on non-organic soy, for example. It's a neurotoxin. Things that excite the NMDA receptor, allowing more calcium in the cell, allowing the cell to become overactivated, they are called excitotoxins. And when excessive amounts of calcium get into a cell, you can start running all kinds of negative, harmful reactions. But I wanted you to just get this point. Too much glutamate across, you got a problem. Too many other things activating this receptor, you got a problem. Too much calcium in this neuron, you got a problem. And it goes too far, too much calcium, the neuron dies. And that's, I think...
Dr. Rogers, I just want to mention to folks watching this video that if you want to see more explanation on this, your theory of dementia, that was in the last video we did with Dr. Rogers. So just check out the playlist that this is in, the Dr. Peter Rogers playlist. It's the video just before this one.
Yeah, and what's nice about this theory is it makes it pretty clear what you should do. Like I just said, don't eat too much sodium. Eat your plants to get your potassium, to get your magnesium, to get your nitrate precursors and your antioxidants. That'll make you healthier. Avoid this non-organic soy with this glyphosate stuff sprayed on it. And they also spray that on non-organic beans too, and non-organic oats. So if you're going to eat oatmeal or beans, make sure they're organic. Okay, here's just an even more. I mean, I could go on and on. Everything I show you is always an oversimplification, but just to make the point clear, when you get excessive calcium in the cell, it activates an enzyme called calpain, which is a perfect name. Cal as in activated by calcium, pain as in painful consequences. It destroys the knockout exchanger. Now you're screwed. You can't pump your calcium out. Cell dies. When you over allow too much calcium into the cell, it'll also cause overactivation of something called nNOS. nNOS stands for neuronal nitric oxide synthase. We've all heard of nitric oxide synthase in the context of your arterial endothelial cells, and it's good in that context. It's a vasodilator, but inside of brain cells, overactivation of this is bad. You make nitric oxide, it's a gas, it diffuses into the mitochondria, it binds with superoxide, the free radicals, and you start producing peroxynitrites, and those will just destroy mitochondria. The cell will die. Okay, this, by the way, is called the no-oh-no pathway. A guy named Martin Pall is the main popularizer of that pathway, and it has a lot of important consequences. It becomes most relevant in the setting of neuroinflammation with some of these rare diseases. So we're not going to get into that today, but I'm just saying is you don't want excessive cytoplasmic calcium, and there's a lot of things that cause it. Another thing that's not widely known is that whatever happens to the gut barrier, something similar tends to happen to the blood-brain barrier. So you have to eat your fiber or you're screwed. The average American's only eating like about, 10 grams of fiber a day. Dennis Burkin said our ancestors probably ate 100 or more. At a minimum, people should try to get at least about 50. So when you don't have fiber, the fiber are needed to maintain these TJs, tight junctions in your gut lining. If you don't have them, then you get bacteria and bacteria toxins. These are bacterial toxins. LPS, comes from gram-negative bacteria. LTA comes from gram-positive bacteria. Those are the two main categories of bacteria, gram-negative, gram-positive. And they are endotoxins. This LPS is for lipopolysaccharide. LTA is for lipoteichoic acid. Anyways, they will travel to the brain. They get into the blood. They'll travel to the brain. You'll have a breakdown of your tight junctions in the brain because these are also made from butyrate, the 4-carbon fatty acid that comes from fiber, the bacterial converting the fiber into short-chain fatty acids. Like butyrate's a short-chain fatty acid, 4 carbons. It's called butyrate, butyric acid. You can also call it butanoic acid. Anyways, when that gets into the brain, it activates the brain macrophages, which are called microglia. And they sense this as an infection. I mean, they've got what are called pattern recognition receptors. And when they sense LPS or LTA, as far as they're concerned, that means an infection's present. So they start releasing all these harsh chemicals to sterilize the adjacent area because they think a bacteria is invading the brain. So they want to kill the bacteria. And these toxic chemicals are released, for example, excessive amounts of nitric oxide, because they have an enzyme called I for inducible nitric oxide. And instead of only being on for seconds, like it is in endothelial cells, this will stay on for hours, and you'll just release tons and tons of nitric oxide. It finds superoxides and makes peroxynitrite a very toxic reactive oxygen species, and it'll destroy cells. You'll get a lot of cell death, destruction of mitochondria. And then the microglia will eat the neuron. Okay, so what I'm saying is you don't want this. And here's a little bit of a joke. This is a photograph of all roads lead to Rome. The old ancient idea, and Rome was a big empire. And what I'm saying is all roads lead to calcium. There are tons of things that are hurting the brain, and they lead to increased cytoplasmic calcium. And when this calcium gets too high, you overactivate that neuron, and it just dies because it can't pump the calcium out. Traumatic brain injury will do it. Like a lot of parents, they mean well, they have their kid play soccer. Soccer is totally stupid. For practice, a grown man kicks a ball at your kid's head. It's like volunteering to be punched in the head. It's stupid. It's absolutely stupid. There's other sports, plenty of other sports too, where there's a lot of head trauma. Bad idea. when you have a lack of oxygen to the neuron, it leads to a net effect being deficient in ATP that you get more calcium in the cytoplasm. Okay, excessive dietary sodium increases cytoplasm calcium. Like we talked about, a lack of dietary potassium and magnesium, you get increased cytoplasm calcium. If you got leaky gut, the net effect is increased cytoplasm calcium. High-fat diets cause insulin resistance. Insulin is cleared from the blood. So insulin goes up when you have insulin resistance in the blood. You clear with insulin-degrading enzyme. Insulin-degrading enzyme also removes BAP. BAP is beta amyloid protein. That's the one people have heard of in context of Alzheimer's. You'll use up your insulin-degrading enzyme, and it won't be able to clear the BAP. And the BAP, beta amyloid protein, goes from the periphery back into the brain, and it increases the risk of dementia. What it does is it activates the NMDA receptor to let more calcium into the cytoplasm. The point I'm trying to make here is that tons of things are pushing towards overactivating the brain. And now the question was, well, this lecture is also about mood. Yeah, well, what do you think is going to happen when you hyperactivate the brain? You're going to have a kid that's hyperactive, a little bit older kid who's anxious, impatient, nervous, frustrated, depressed, all this stuff, MSG, MFG. What that really means is glutamate, monosodium glutamate, manufactured free glutamate. The glutamate the body cares about. It doesn't care about anything else. It just cares about the glutamate. That's a stimulant. When you're stressed out, you get increased glutamate released at neurons. Sleep deprivation and caffeine increase glutamate at neurons. Corticosteroid medicines increase glutamate at neurons. If you've got these electrical things, Wi-Fi, cell phone held next to your head, they open up voltage-gated calcium channels, the same one I showed you earlier in the context of an action potential traveling down a neuron. So they're letting more calcium in. If you got mitochondria inhibitors, super common, like mold inhibitors they put in all the processed food, they're very routinely mitochondria inhibitors. Now you can't make ATP from the mitochondria, so you can't pump calcium out. Calcium in the cytoplasm goes up. So what I see all the time, I look at thousands of demented brains. I usually just see a shrunken brain. Here is a mitochondria. Here's the outer membrane. Here's the inner membrane, the green. Then there's the intermembranous space. In the center is the matrix. And we're going to be pumping protons into the intermembranous space. And so this is what I mean, too, that the human body is so complicated. It's just like a miracle. And also, I'll say it quite clearly. I believe in God because I know a lot of this stuff. I've been studying this stuff in great detail since I was in high school. And what the inner mitochondrial membrane really is it's a nuclear reactor. We talk about, humans are so smart. In the mid of the 1900s, they figured out how to split the atom. Well, the human body figured out how to split the atom, or the life on Earth, whatever it was. I don't know the exact amount of time, millions or billions of years ago, whatever it was. Okay, but look what they do. They take a hydrogen and they split the atom. Hydrogen consists of a proton and an electron. They split them, okay? The electrons are passed down a series of carriers, kind of like, again, a snowball rolling down a hill towards the ultimate electron acceptor, which is oxygen. It has the greatest electronegativity that will grab the electrons once they reach the bottom of the hill. In the meantime, the energy of the electrons being passed down through these carriers, like a fireman bucket brigade, is to pump out protons. The H plus is a proton, and then you accumulate a lot of protons in the center of the mitochondria and the intermembranous space. And then what you do is at the complex 5 here, ATP synthase, you allow one to come back through, and it'll spin ATP synthase, and that spinning motion facilitates a phosphate being added to ADP, adenosine diphosphate, to make adenosine triphosphate, ATP, with the 3 phosphates. And that's life on Earth right there. That's where energy comes from. So you want this system to work well. This is your energy system. This is the vast majority of your energy comes from that. The gradient across this inner mitochondrial membrane, IMM is inner mitochondrial membrane, it's off the charts. It's negative 160 millivolts, the highest gradient I'm aware of in the human body. It's like a giant electrical power plant. It's extraordinary. Okay, and then also I had experiences. I'm trying to understand. I had read about fat causing insulin resistance by inhibiting mitochondrial complex 3, and I'd here and there heard of other things being toxic to mitochondria, but I went through all my biochem books. I own about 7 of them, and I couldn't find anything on mitochondrial inhibition, but I knew it had to be more common. So I started going through all the papers. I very quickly found over 50 of them, and they're really common. Look at F-. They typically put fluoride, in the drinking water, okay? Inhibits mitochondrial complex 4. Lead inhibits it. Atrazine, that's what they spray in all the non-organic corn. Okay, BPA, the estrogenic material used to make hard plastic bottles. A lot of people drink their water out of that. BPA, it inhibits inner mitochondrial membrane. Statins, super common medicine given to lower cholesterol. I think that's part of why they increase the risk of diabetes. And they can increase the risk in some settings of cognitive decline. Metformin for treatment of diabetes. It's a mitochondria inhibitor. That's why I would never take it. Some people say, oh, well, you're going to increase longevity. Well, one of the big theories of aging is mitochondrial injury. So I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it.
Right.
And then here's what's funny. They're giving these drugs to people to treat their depression. Look at this, SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They're mitochondrial inhibitors. So you're going to tell me you think you're going to improve somebody's brain by inhibiting their brain mitochondria? The brain is the most metabolically active part of the entire body. It needs tons and tons of ATP production from its mitochondria. So to give them a drug that shuts down their mitochondrial production, stupid, okay? If it wasn't for the fact that these drugs generate millions and billions of dollars, I don't think anybody in their right mind would prescribe them. But once you got millions and billions of dollars behind a drug, it's pretty easy to buy a scientist at these universities and get them to set up a study to make it look good. I tell you that because the average chump thinks, oh, the healthcare system is designed to help them get better. No, it's not. It's designed to make money off you. If you get better, that's nice, but it really doesn't matter. The patient is irrelevant. No one cares about patients, okay? That doctor, they care about that bean counter. The bean counter is on their tail with a whip. Get your 30 cases for today. Generate your billing codes. You're lazy. There's a doctor across town who's generating 40 billing codes a day. How come you're only generating 30? Maybe we ought to hire somebody younger than you, replace you so we can get more money out of them. You're not pulling your weight. You're not doing your job. You better start seeing 35 a day or we're going to let you go. That's why doctors are always in a hurry, because there's some bean counter on their butt forcing them to go faster.
Dr. Rogers, okay. I wanted to clarify that you are not talking about the small amount of patients that have an emergency medicine condition. I think I've seen the field; they get good care, but that's a small, tiny amount of the patients, right? The rest of them, the lifestyle diseases, illnesses, that's the ones that never get better, unfortunately.
Right. You are correct. Yeah, I think that in conventional healthcare, the acute care system is actually great. The emergency docs, they know a lot. They do a good job, and they're very good at a lot of surgeries. But what I'm saying is, let's say once a week in a Western hospital, you'll have one patient admitted for appendicitis, 2 for diverticulitis, and you'll have a skillful surgeon operate on them. That's great. You get, maybe 1 or 2 gallbladders a week. That's great. Okay, you get maybe about 5 cataract patients. That's great. They'll do a good job with them. But almost every single patient is overweight, hypertensive, pre-diabetic or diabetic, with coronary artery disease, impotence, cerebral vascular disease, lots of them with poor dentition. What I'm saying is the overwhelming vast majority of disease is chronic dietary disease, and you cannot fix a dietary disease with a pill or a surgery. So, I think the medicine system, they're great at a lot of stuff. They can do a kidney transplant. They can put you on dialysis. They can replace a heart valve. They can do a lot of impressive, fancy things, and that's all good. And I can also tell you the doctors want to help the patient. The vast majority of them start out really wanting the best for the patient, and, most of them are pretty good students. They had other choices, and they mean well, but the system is not the same as the doctor, and the system is the one in power, not the doctor. The doctor must answer to the system, and if the doctor pisses off the system, the doctor gets fired. So it's just how it is. And there's no way to change it. It cannot change. Don't even think of medical reform. It cannot happen. The only thing that could save it is what I said, and that will never be allowed in a million years to happen. Okay. So this is just showing.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that if a patient on their own decided to change their lifestyle for the better, they could set their body up to heal in a way that they won't need that system anymore. Is that right?
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying, is that the wise move is to realize the system's not there to help you. You have to learn how to help yourself. And once you've learned that, you've got a very good chance to do well. Here, for example, is an atherosclerotic plaque, and it can be largely reabsorbed. You can reabsorb an atherosclerotic plaque is basically a blood clot. You can reabsorb the acute clot, the lipid core portion, the necrotic core portion, dead material, fat material, and a little bit of the cellular fiber tissue. The acellular fiber tissue and the calcium, I don't think you're going to reabsorb that. Some people say nowadays, oh, you can slowly reabsorb calcium. Well, really slow. I've never seen it, and I've seen many thousands of cases. So it might slowly happen theoretically, but in actual practice, not significantly. When you eat a high-fat meal, you activate your neutrophils in the blood. They release what is called MPO, myeloperoxidase. It's very positively charged. It interacts with the endothelial glycocalyx, which is negatively charged, and causes it to collapse down. Once it collapsed down, then exposed are these adhesion molecules. So normally the red blood cells have a negative charge and the glycocalyx has a negative charge, so they repel each other. So the RBCs don't stick to the wall of the artery. But when you got all this fat in the blood, it damages the lining of the endothelial cells, and you start getting cells sticking to the wall, which increases the risk of clotting. So it's bad. All kinds of bad things happen when you eat high-fat diets. You get externalization of phosphatidylserine, whereby this relatively stiff phospholipid in the plasma membrane of your red blood cells, it flips from the inner leaflet of the plasma membrane to the outer leaflet. So that's called phosphatidylserine externalization. It makes the red blood cells more stiff, and they're more prone to, because they're stiff, to being easily removed by the spleen. So they die faster, okay? And something similar happens to brain cells, this concept of phosphatidylserine externalization. We're not going to go into all the details of it, but it's another mechanism in neurodegeneration. What I'm trying to show you is that you're not going to win with this. We already talked about this. Tight junctions are made by dietary fiber, smiley face, happy bacteria, the good bacteria. They make butyrate. Butyrate goes to the lining cells, and they make tight junctions, which prevent leaky gut. If you get leaky gut, bacterial toxins, LPS, get through the leaky gut, the lack of a tight junction here, they get into the blood, and they cause all kinds of problems. Oh, a big problem they cause is they form clots. And they cause a bad form of clots called amyloid clots. So normally the fibrinogen, the blood clotting protein, has a secondary protein structure that is alpha helix, like a slinky, cylindrical. And once it interacts with LPS, LTA, or excessive free iron, then they become flat. That's called beta pleated sheet, secondary protein structure. And they then will stack up like a deck of cards. And when the bigger a molecule gets, the more likely it is to precipitate out of solution, which means to clot. So what I'm saying is people with leaky gut, because they don't eat enough fiber and they eat too much oils and processed food, the emulsifiers are also toxic. They get these bacterial toxins in the blood. They also become iron overloaded because processed food is iron fortified, and red meat, for example, has a lot of iron. And heme iron is much more absorbed than plant iron. So they become iron overloaded. The men in their 20s, the women after they're postmenopausal. And all these things predispose the blood to clotting. And then it starts plugging up little capillaries all over the body, in the heart, in the brain. And the more you plug up those little capillaries in the brain, the faster you get stupid. The more you plug them up in the heart, the weaker your heart gets. So these two did a lot of the research on it. Her name is Ethelresia Pretorius from South Africa, PhD. Douglas Kell from England, PhD guy. They're both brilliant. They deserve a Nobel Prize. They'll never get it. Here's a normal clot. It's like the fibrinogen clotting proteins are like little pieces of spaghetti. They're relatively linear, tubular, simple in structure, versus dense matted deposit. These are the amyloid clots like I was just showing you with LPS, LTA, and excess free iron. And these clots are so irregular that they're very difficult to lyse, because normally you have clot formation, clot lysis, clot formation, clot lysis. There's this ongoing clotting and dissolving all the time in the blood. But these, once they form, they're a lot harder to dissolve, and they're more likely to plug up an artery in your brain or something. The reason why iron, once it's free, is so bad is because it'll do what's called ferrous redox cycling back and forth between Fe2 plus and Fe3 plus. It's a transitional metal, meaning it has a variable valence, and it can have different valence states, a 3 plus or 2 plus. And in so doing, it drops electrons onto oxygen, creating free radicals, reactive oxygen species, and these will damage tissue. So the point I'm making about iron, I'll show you a picture here. Here's what iron's all about. This guy, Ed Weinberg, said it best. He says, iron is like a fire. In your house, you want iron, you want fire in the stove. You want fire in the fireplace to warm your hands and the stove to cook. But you don't want fire anywhere else in your house. And the same thing with free iron. You want iron inside a hemoglobin for handing off oxygen. You want iron in some enzyme, active sites, for its variable valence facilitates the reaction occurring. But you don't want it anywhere else. And Americans are overloaded with iron. This is just showing positive tests for blood clotting with them. High-fat diets cause brain.
Dr. Rogers, to go back, did you say that the main reason why somebody might have iron overload in the wrong spot is because of leaky gut, because of not eating enough fiber and too high of a fat diet? Is that
no. Yeah, I'm sorry. The lack of dietary fiber in the leaky gut led to the bacterial toxins getting into the blood. The excessive dietary iron just comes because people eat too much meat, and they also eat processed food that's fortified with iron. You know, when I was a kid, for example, I thought iron made you stronger, like Popeye with spinach, and the iron was supposedly the magic component. So I used to intentionally eat all these Raisin Bran cereals that were fortified with iron. I didn't know any better. I got my serum ferritin checked, and it was around 380 or something a couple of years ago. So what I did was every time I go for blood, like let's say to get my total cholesterol checked, I just have them pull off about 3 or 4, like usually about 4 little test tubes and discard them because I want to lower my hematocrit, you know. So that's what I do. You could donate blood as a way to lower it if your serum ferritin is too high. I like to keep serum ferritin somewhere between 30 to 100. Some people say you should keep it 50 to 100. There's different theories. Some people say if you get too low, you might be prone to restless leg syndrome. Other people say, oh no, you want to, you know, anywhere from 80 to 30 because you'll make your blood less likely to auto-oxidize, to have problems like I just showed you with free iron. I know some world famous atherosclerosis researchers, and they donate blood every year because they want to keep their serum ferritins low. Okay, so here's the fact that the blood-brain barrier is also protected by dietary fiber. Short-chain fatty acids from gut bacteria, the fiber protects the blood-brain barrier. So the butyric acid, SCFA, is short-chain fatty acid. It goes to the brain, blood-brain barrier, and these tight junctions are made using the same thing. And if you don't have fiber, you can get an opening of the blood-brain barrier and toxins from the blood get into the brain. You don't want toxins or anything in the brain because it has very precise milieu for ionic gradients. And if you interfere with that, because the blood's volatile, after you eat a meal, you get a big change in the chemicals in the blood. You don't want that in the brain parenchyma or it'll mess up your neurons. And the other thing too is I'm the one who brought it to the attention. I've tried to teach neurologists they really should be feeding high fiber diets to these post-stroke patients and post-brain trauma patients to maintain their gut lining, because if they got leaky gut and leaky blood-brain barrier, the two occur simultaneously with head trauma, the brain's more vulnerable to being exposed to toxins. The center of a brain...
Doctor, I wanted to mention that and tell folks out here who are watching this video that, yeah, you're the first person I have heard this information from about fiber and adequate fiber protecting your brain and the blood-brain barrier. I think everybody needs to hear this.
Right. This is how you protect it, to be smart. Okay. And that's kind of the point is, you know, I'm going through this step by step. What makes a person smart? And what I'm saying is, like, when I talk to people who are also pretty smart, they listen to me, they go, yeah, you're right. You're a genius. You're correct. You know, that's great. I read your book. Okay. That's what the real smart people say to me. And then when I talk to all these dummies, they're always like, no one else does that. No one else does that. Why should I have to do that? And I'm like, I don't care what you do. I'm just trying to give you a chance, you know? It don't matter to me what someone else does. Yeah, I'm trying to help. And this is what I'm trying to say is what I'm basically saying here is a lot of people have a family member or a friend who's been labeled as mental illness or has been labeled as stupid. And they get put on all these drugs, okay, for depression, for anxiety, for being neurotic, for being bipolar, etc., for being schizophrenic. And what I'm saying is there's tons of fixable problems, and you should try to fix all these problems first, because if you don't, you're just going to be stuck on a bunch of pills all the time that don't even work, and they're going to cause a slow chemical lobotomy. Okay, so you get your act together or you're screwed. They're going to drug you into a lobotomy. And so I'm trying to give you a chance. You know, these poor kids drugged with amphetamines. It's ridiculous. When I was a kid in grade school, I think I was smart and I would do the homework fast, and then I would just want to joke around with my friends, and, you know, I'd throw paper airplanes and goof around, whatever. Anyways, I was taken out of class. I was described as a hyperactive problem child. I was put into something called a pod at that time. So my entire third grade and fourth grade, I spent in solitary confinement. And I read all the SRA books. They're called Scholastic Reader Assist. Yeah, but I hated it. I hated school. I literally hated it. And like I said, if I had lived 10 years later, they would have drugged me. I'd be a drugged out amphetamine kid. If I hadn't, luckily they didn't have those drugs when I was young. But yeah, I think public schools are kind of ridiculous. I would avoid them. If you were a parent there with young children, I'd avoid them any way you could. Go to a Catholic school, go to some other private school or homeschool, anything but those public schools. I think they're terrible. I think they're not even designed to educate. They're designed to sort of like train them a kid in a certain way. I don't want to get into it. Anyways, here is Alzheimer's disease, the Kelpain-Cathepsin hypothesis. This comes out of the Japanese guy, Tetsumori Yamashima, MD, PhD. They assigned him, why are so many Japanese people becoming demented? The conclusion he came to was, it's because of the omega-6 PUFAs, the cooking oils. Okay, I'm not going to get into this whole Kelpain-Cathepsin theory, but just so you know, It's sort of the big one. Here's a PUFA. Polyunsaturated fatty acid means more than one double bond. In between is something called a methylene bridge. It's a carbon with two hydrogens. The grip on this hydrogen is kind of weak because the double bonds are pulling on the electron, so it'll tend to get yanked off. I'll show that on the following slide what that means. But here's a nice slide from Chris Knob. He's a guy, he's an ophthalmologist, and he looked at all the data from a bunch of different countries. And what did he see correlating with diabetes and obesity in the modern world? He said it totally correlates with the vegetable oils, the omega-6 cooking oils, that sugar consumption had already come up long before the increase in diabetes and obesity. So he doesn't think it's the sugar. He thinks it's primarily the vegetable oils. Now, just to be completely descriptive, he's a little bit of a paleo, keto, carnivore type guy. So he doesn't want it blamed on meat and the fat. I'm not going to get into all the details of that. The reason I showed the slide is that vegetable oils are much worse than people think they are, including olive oil. I would avoid all of them. I agree with Dr. Lessinson. They should all, and Dr. McDougall, they should all be avoided. They're all bad.
Dr. Rogers, I tell people that oil gives plant-based eating a bad reputation because people think it's okay.
Right, because you got a lot of people that are philosophic vegans. They're like, well, I eat plant foods because I don't want cruelty to animals. But or they think that they're healthy because a lot of people are trying to promote olive as a health food and stuff. And then you're going to get bad outcomes. And people are going to say, well, plant diet doesn't work. I know somebody who was a vegan and they got sick. They plugged up all their arteries. Well, if they're eating all these oils, they're going to trash their arteries. They're going to increase the risk of cancer, etc. This is just one of the toxic aldehyde metabolic byproducts of eating omega-6 cooking oils, HNE, hydroxynonenal. And it also inhibits intermitochondrial membrane. So basically, you're screwing over this intermitochondrial membrane. The omega-6 cooking oils trash it. Municipal tap water trashes it. Statins trash it. Metformin trashes it. Antidepressants trash it. And the more you mess with this thing, the worse off you're going to be. And the more you're not going to be able to figure out what's wrong. People like to have one cause, one problem, and then just fix the one problem. But that's not how it is. I routinely see people all the time with 10, 15, 20, 25 different things causing brain damage. And their best chance is to try to avoid all of them. Usually, once you know what it is, you can avoid it. But you have to make the effort to learn. Oh, here's what I was talking about, lipid peroxidation. This hydrogen will get plucked off. You'll have an unpaired electron remaining. That makes it a free radical. Oxygen will combine with it. Two adjacent oxygens to each other bound to this carbon chain is called a lipid peroxide, the two adjacent oxygens, and that can destroy other things. It initiates like a chain reaction because it too is a free radical, meaning has an unpaired electron in its outer orbital, and it'll react with something else, What you need is an antioxidant to come along and to quench the free radical. An antioxidant is a molecule that's so big and so well stabilized that it can give up an electron and still be stable, not undergo a chain reaction. I'm not going to get into all the details of this, but the bottom line was that H&E causes brain damage. It messes with a protein called the heat shock protein, HSP, and that will lead to neuron cell death. So I think Tetsumori Yamashima is right. These omega-6 are contributing to brain damage in a very major way, and you should avoid them completely. PFOAs from these nonstick cookware, they're also toxic. They have, it's a mild toxic effect, but they're toxic to the pancreatic beta cells. And you don't want to be in the kitchen when somebody's cooking that stuff. I had family members that would cook that stuff, and I would yell at them. I say, you put the fan on above the cooker, you open the window, you shouldn't be in the kitchen, you shouldn't be using them at all, and I would leave the room. Another thing that came out, this guy Seralini is a big famous researcher on estrogenic chemicals, and what he figured out is most of them aren't just estrogenic, they're also neurotoxics. He actually recommended changing their name. Instead of calling them EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, call them ENDCs, endocrine and neurologic disrupting chemicals. And a lot of them are damaging to the thyroid as well. The relevance is these things are all over the place. They're ubiquitous. They put them in everything. They use them for all the plastics, and they use them as preservatives in personal care products. And there's a lot of other sources of them. So, okay, well, like I said, a good way to live is like Adam and Eve, but keep your indoor heating and plumbing. Let's see, what else do I got? Yeah. And I, in general, try to avoid a lot of these gimmicky products like protein supplements. Consumer Reports has written multiple papers on how routine it is. They're contaminated with heavy metals. Anything that is a powder, is easy to contaminate with heavy metals because they make it heavier and you can sell it for more money. There's dark chocolate also.
Yeah.
Yes. So I don't buy powders.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll give you another example. Well, first of all, let me show you a synapse or two. Here's cortisol. So cortisol, like I said, from stress, caffeine, or sleep deprivation, also causes increased release of glutamate. The VGCC, voltage-gated calcium channel, EMF, like from a cell phone, will do this, okay? From Wi-Fi in your house. You can hardwire devices in your house. It'll increase calcium in the cytoplasm. So it's just one more thing of many increasing cytoplasm calcium to increase activation of these neurons. And, normal neuronal activation is a good thing, but when you overactivate them, you can do it so much that they die. In the processed food, they put tons of this glutamate in there, tons of it, because it gets people addicted to the food. And then they add the omega-6 cooking oils to fry some component of it or to make everything stick together. Then they put high fructose corn syrup in there, often contaminated by HG, by mercury, and you end up with a food that's really toxic. They're looking for what's called the bliss point. By adding all the amounts of these, they do them on people from the public. They research them. How do they get the bliss point of taste, pleasure, mouth feel that they'll keep on buying it? This lady, her name is Catherine Reed. She's a PhD. Her daughter had autism. She had heard that reducing dietary glutamate can help some of these kids. And that was her job. She was a protein biochemist. So she studied all the sources of dietary glutamate and found that once she took her kid off all of them, and there were a lot of them to find, eventually what you come to the conclusion is just don't eat processed food. Her daughter was cured of autism. Now, there's different paths to becoming autistic, but glutamate is a common one, and it's potentially curable if you catch it early enough. It depends how severe it is, but she cured her daughter. It's pretty famous. She's been sort of checked out by a bunch of different sources. She's for real. She wrote a good book. Here's her book, Fat, Stressed, and Sick. And so, any patient with a kid with autism should want that, or hyperactivity. Because what I'm talking about food and mood is this glutamate, it makes your neurons active. If your neurons are hyperactive, you're a lot more likely to be hyperactive yourself, to be anxious, to be depressed, etc.
Right.
This is manufactured-free glutamate, MFG. So you just take any protein, especially ones that are high in glutamate residues to begin with. The individual amino acids are initially connected to each other by these little purple lines. That's peptide bonds. When you process this, you break up those individual bonds, and now the glutamates all become free so that they can overwhelm your gut's layer ability to sequester them, and they can flood into your blood and flood into your brain and be very neurotoxic. It's a neurotoxin. It's an excitotoxin. One of the common arguments you're going to hear is, well, the blood-brain barrier will protect that from happening. Yeah, right. There's a whole bunch of areas around the third ventricle and whatnot that are chemosensors. They don't have a blood-brain barrier, so they can be affected. It can leak from there to adjacent areas. Plus, lots of people have, first of all, babies don't have a very good formed blood-brain barrier. Older people have ischemic breakdown of their blood-brain barrier a lot of times. So this stuff gets into the brain, and you can also overwhelm the gating system when you have too high a concentration. So this is her again. This is Catherine Reed. Her website's Unblind My Mind. She's the one who wrote all about glutamate. And the bottom line, she said, some of these processed foods have incredibly high dietary amounts of glutamate, and they're overwhelming the body's ability to sort of detoxify it and keep it away from the brain. It's basically causing brain damage. You want to make a rodent fat, put more MSG in the food. They become addicted to it. They eat too much. Okay, I'm not going to go into all that, but I'm just giving you the idea of it. Glutamate also, paradoxically, when you eat excessive amounts of dietary glutamate, it will increase plasma cortisol, the stress hormone. So you see the potential for a vicious cycle here. The dietary glutamate is increasing cortisol, then the cortisol is increasing glutamate in the neuron as well. So the dietary glutamate has a neuron hyperactivation effect, excitotoxin, and it increases cortisol, which adds to that hyperactivation effect. So it's a screw job. It's a double positive that self-reinforces itself, a vicious cycle. Okay, excessive dietary sodium also has a sympathetic effect, meaning that it increases sympathetic nervous system, meaning that it increases the stress response. So it's a minor contribution to the whole problem, but it adds to it. I talked about aspartame, the common sweetener. I talked about GP, glyphosate, also activating the NMDA receptor. So those are just more ways of excitotoxicity. And for my theory, Rogers' theory is a little mnemonic, ROSI, R-O-S-I. So Rogers' theory, OGD, oxygen glucose delivery. You got to get enough oxygen glucose to the brain. Stimulants, meaning caffeine, sleep deprivation, stress, aspartame, excessive glutamate in the diet. All those things increase activation of that neuron, the metabolic rate. Okay, then you got to have oxygen and glucose matched to it. I call this the supply and demand theory. But if you inhibit your mitochondria, or your SERCA, your endoplasmic reticulum storage pump, then that's like equivalent to having less oxygen and glucose. you're going to widen this gap between the metabolic rate of the neuron and the oxygen and glucose delivery, as well as, the ATP production capacity, because your mitochondria is not working. The bigger this gap, the more likely the neuron just says, screw it, I can't survive. And it just goes into programmed cell death called apoptosis. So this is my theory again here. Normally, their supply and demand are even. Metabolic rate, MR, and I jokingly call it GOD, glucose oxygen delivery. And so if this gets too low, glucose oxygen delivery, as well as ATP production, relative to metabolic rate, the neuron just dies, goes into apoptosis. I should have showed a brain MRI and CT, but the bottom line is when I look at brains, most common thing I see in all these demented people is just a shrunken brain. I don't usually see a bunch of strokes. I don't usually see any big cortical stroke. I'll often see a few little tiny periventricular flare hyperintensities. A lot of times I don't see any. I mostly see, almost every case, a shrunken brain. It's from apoptosis. Okay, I made a little poem here, poems. What's going on with the poems?
Dr. Rogers, I just want to the audience that Rogers is a radiologist, so he does this all the time. You're constantly looking at images, correct?
Yeah. My background is that I was an imaging guided surgeon initially, called an interventional radiologist, doing surgery with imaging guidance. Like I'll go into the abdomen with a CAT scan or with ultrasound for all kinds of procedures, putting in artificial blood vessels in the liver, in the legs, all this stuff. And then I switched to primarily being a neuroradiologist. I actually trained in endovascular brain surgery, but neurosurgery's taken it over. So I decided not to continue. I did half a fellowship in that. And so I did continue in reading the brain MRIs and the brain CTs. I've seen many thousands of them. I've written books on, I have the best theory in the world for what causes dementia, the supply and demand theory, also called neurovascular uncoupling theory. And I also have the best theory in the world for spinal degeneration, ischemic spine theory of degeneration, but I also have a chemical component to it. Anyways, the pumps, you got to pay attention to what's going on with the pumps. And also, I'm going to tell you, why do I think my theory is so superior to all the other ones? Because I think they're a joke. If you look at Alzheimer's, first of all, there's no historical question you can ask the patient. You can't put a stethoscope on them or do any physical exam finding to diagnose it. There is no good blood test to diagnose Alzheimer's. The so-called imaging findings of parietal temporal atrophy, I seldom see those. It's nonsense, okay? You can't diagnose it effectively at autopsy either because there's so much overlap with normal patients having extracellular senile plaques, intracellular neurofibrillary tangles, and so-called Alzheimer's patients not having the findings. That's really not that useful. It can help you a little bit in the so-called Alzheimer's diagnosis, and then there's no treatment for it. So what I'm saying is, what would you call a disease? You can't diagnose it when the patient's alive. You can't diagnose it when the patient's dead, and you have no treatment. You would call that nonsense, and I think that's what it primarily is. The reason it got pumped up with so much publicity is the more you can convince the funders, the people who've got the money to pay for your research, that Alzheimer's is where it's at and you need more money, the more they're going to do that. It's being done to get research grant money, not because it's true or because it's useful. Whereas everything I'm telling you about, it's pretty easy. Avoid the excitotoxins, okay? Don't eat any processed food to avoid the glutamate. Never, ever drink aspartame. Don't eat a high-fat diet or you're going to have elevated beta-amyloid protein. Only eat organic so you don't get stuck with glyphosate and atrazine. These things are all doable. Avoid all those mitochondrial inhibitors I showed you. I showed you about 50 of them. That's totally doable. Okay, filter your water so you don't end up with F- and Al in there, which cause oxidative stress in the brain. And once you avoid the high-fat diets and the oils, you'll avoid atherosclerosis, so you'll be unlikely to get hypertension, to get congestive heart failure where you plug up the arteries in the heart. You'll be much lower risk for AFib and for needing aortic valve replacement, okay? And when you eat the plant foods, you get all the stuff you need. You get the potassium and the magnesium, and you avoid the sodium. You also get the nitrate precursors. You get the fiber to protect your blood-brain barrier. So all the good stuff is in plants. It's just the way it is.
Right.
Yep. If you'd have asked me what I thought of plants back in the 1980s when I was a college wrestler, I would say, or a plant-based vegan diet. I'd say that's some bunch of nonsense. Sounds like some hippie, sandal-wearing, Grateful Dead tie-dye shirt, bunch of crap. I would have thought it was a joke, nonsense. Don't waste my time. But then when I started learning about what makes people healthy, I saw my father go to open heart surgery because I didn't know enough to talk him out of it. I saw my mother die of cancer. I'm like, you know what? I got to learn about all this stuff because this is where the answers are. You can't cure these diseases with pills and surgery, but people are cured all the time of hypertension, coronary artery disease, diabetes by improving their diet. And those are the main gateway diseases that lead to almost everything else. So my attitude is I don't complain about it. I say, thank God there's hope. There's a chance. It's not inevitable. It's not inevitable that we have to be fat, sick, and stupid. There's things we can do. Thank God for that. I'll do it. Whatever it is, I'll do it. I think that's the proper attitude.
Dr. Rogers, this topic today is mainly about mood. And so what you're saying is that you can always modify it, because you're not going to hear it most likely from your physician who's treating this, right? They're probably not going to tell you, but with all this information that you've given us today, it appears that there's so many ways to modify, because so many things are detrimental that you're probably doing already. There's hope, like you said.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is wonderful news. You always want the problem to be your fault. Yes, it's your fault. That's good, because if it's your fault because of what you're eating, you could change what you eat. That's a fixable problem. If somebody on the other hand says you got bad genetics, you're screwed, there's nothing you could do. Right. So you want it to be your fault for your diet. And there's tons of these things. You just basically have to stop eating processed food, because it's in almost every processed food. I don't eat anything that's got more than one ingredient. And, I don't know how much time we have, but I read a whole bunch of other books that are interesting. Things like Retaining the Mind, written by this pediatric allergist from Mayo Clinic. I don't know if he's pediatric. He's an allergist from Mayo Clinic. And he basically found you have to sometimes do elimination diets to avoid certain foods. Let's see, which were the most common ones? Citrus fruits, he thought, corn, gluten. He felt simple sugars were a problem, lactose. Anyways, the reason I was curious about these books about food sensitivities, food reactions, is that more and more claims are being made that these cause mental illness. He felt that he had almost pretty much journeyed into early Alzheimer's, so-called Alzheimer's. Let's just call it early dementia. And that he came out of it because he knew about this allergy stuff, and he started doing elimination diets to improve his diet. The reason I like this, and I'll show you another one here. I like this book called Brain Allergy. The book itself, actually, I think it was a stupid book, but I'll tell you why I still like it. I can think a book is stupid, that the author is a lousy writer, that it's poorly done, and still think it was valuable. The reason it's valuable was this was written by a psychiatrist, and he wrote that he would take his schizophrenic patients and he would test them. He would put them on a fast for 4 to 7 days. And he said a lot of them got better, which made him believe it was just due to some type of abnormal food reaction, like a food allergy. And then he would introduce the foods gradually coming back to try to figure out if he could figure out what had caused that to happen to them. And he's not the only one. There's a lady, a physician named Doris Rapp, has written a book about that. I'm actually just about ready to start reading her book. I've been reading these other papers about quinolinate. That's kind of what I'm interested in at the moment. So what I'm trying to say is this idea that a psychiatric illness can be due to diet. For example, there's a lot of famous experts on schizophrenia that think a lot of it is due to an autoimmune disease reaction from leaky gut. That's great. That means you could fix it. These are duplicate slides, just showing that there's a lot of lead. For example, people say, turmeric, it's the greatest thing in the world. Turmeric, it's anti-cancer. It's so good. What they found out is they were pretty routinely putting lead chromate into turmeric, the powder, because it makes it heavier, and then they could sell it for more money. So that's why I'm real cautious. I would never eat anything that's in a powder, because I'm too worried they're going to put a heavy metal in there to make it heavier, sell it for more money, and it's toxic. They tested a whole bunch of brands here, and every single one of them tested positive for lead on on thyme, on oregano, and on ginger. The powders are the worst ones. Okay, we talked about a lot of the things that improve life. Get your sunshine. We're made to get sunshine. It does a lot for us, not just vitamin D. It also releases our nitric oxide precursors. It builds up our endothelial glycocalyx.
I'm getting it. I'm out here right now getting it during our talk.
Yeah, that's great. Ever since the beginning of time, humans have gotten sunlight. We're made for that. And there's an intelligence to it. I actually started learning about this grounding stuff where you connect your feet to electrical ground or be barefoot outside. I don't know for sure how good it is, but I have tried it. I seem to sleep better, but I haven't electrically tested it to know for sure if it's working or if it's true. But that's the latest thing I'm kind of experimenting with. I'll talk about that in a future talk. Let's see, potentially negative effect. Okay, we kind of go all this stuff. I don't want to go too much of these things. But basically, if you have a purpose in your life and you live true to your purpose, you like yourself and you'll be happier. And other things that make people happy since the beginning of time is humans spending time together with friends, with family, helping other people. You release reward neurotransmitters when you do that. There's different theories of what makes people sad and depressed. Overactivation of the brain, hyperreactivity does it. I'll give you one interesting thing. I'm currently reading a book called Anxiety Generation. The author's name is Jonathan Haidt, and the gist of it is that he thinks that the more a child, let's say a teenager, uses a cell phone, the more anxious they become and the more depressed they become, the worse their performance in school. And he attributes it to the social, psychological pressures of social media for a teenager. They're not ready for that. It's an unnatural form of social activity. We're made to interact outdoors with other humans. And the point I'm making is maybe he's right, but maybe it's because they're holding that phone to their head all day and they're opening up their voltage-gated calcium channels. It doesn't have to be he's a sociologist, psychologist, his partner. He's a psychologist, his partner's a sociologist. But what I'm saying is you can explain it from a biochemical point of view. You're overloading your neurons with calcium. That's not going to be good. When the brain's inflamed, you get sickness behavior, where you, like a human, if they have an infection, they would go off by themselves so they don't infect the rest of the group, and they lower their energy expenditures so their body can focus on healing. That can cause depression. There's other theories too, and I think a lot of times it's a combination of things. Sometimes it certainly is a life event, sadness. You love somebody and they break up with you, that sort of thing. But anyways, it's nice to know that. And I also know, look at the mood. If you look at the internet, these paleo keto carnivores are notoriously obnoxious and kind of aggressive and nasty. Whereas vegans, the paleo keto carnivores come to vegan sites and write all kinds of nasty troll comments. But the vegans, we seldom go to the paleo keto carnivore sites. We almost feel sorry for them as being pathetic and plugging up their arteries. But I also think it's because the vegan diet, it calms a person down. You don't get excited and make a fuss over nothing. You're less emotional. You're less impulsive. It improves your mood and your behavior. And what I'm trying to say is a low-fat vegan diet isn't just good for opening up the artery. It improves blood flow to the skin. It makes you better looking. It calms you down. It makes you socially better able to get along with people. This is just a brief summary of the Dr. McDougall elimination diet for some of these food allergies and food intolerances. A little bit on gluten, but I don't want to get into all that right now. Here's my Spartan vegan pyramid of health. Do all the social stuff. Time with friends and family, get your sunshine, exercise, follow your purpose in life, practice your religion. All the major religion people are a lot healthier than atheistic people. Get your sleep. Eat your starches, eat your fruits and veggies, and you'll need to take B12 probably, and that's about it. So that's what I got.
That's it. Okay, so that pyramid basically showed, I talked about, almost everything is within your control if you choose to.
Right.
All right. Now, Well, let me ask you a question. I just want to play maybe a little devil's advocate here for a second. If we talked about how acute care and emergency medicine is valuable, okay, but it's a very small segment of illness, okay. But what about something that someone has a mood disorder that is not potentially covered on this? Might that exist? That it might be very small and they might be someone different, whereas everyone else can change and improve their mood.
Right. So what I would say is you can talk with the person, why do you feel sad or why do you feel anxious? And sometimes you'll be able to work through that. But a lot of times it's illogical. And there's an old saying by Jonathan Swift, you can't reason somebody out of something they weren't reasoned into. So that might be the case. You could reduce their cell phone time if the kid is a teenager, for example. You could push them towards, a low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet with no oils. You could fast them for, 3 to 7 days. And it's like some schizophrenics, they come totally back to normal. And then you try to figure out what caused it, because you might be able to cure them. Because if you don't cure them, they might be screwed for life. They'll be put on powerful antipsychotic medications. They'll develop tardive dyskinesia, secondary Parkinsonism. They'll be in an institution, unable to ever function in the outside world the rest of their life. So it is definitely worth it up front to try to figure out if it was caused by a food reaction. And these people claim, like, look at this lady, Barbara Stitt. She did this for like about 20 years. She followed these probation patients, and she saw this giant improvement in their behavior. They went from being arrested to potentially spending the rest of their life in jail to never going back to having a problem, to getting on with their life and being fine. And she said the number one thing, and she's got a lot of experience, and she's pretty famous. There was all these judges and lawyers and people in that business that remarked on how extraordinary her results were. That lady, Doris Rapp, is pretty famous too. And same thing. She worked especially with children versus that psychiatrist I alluded to, brain allergy book. She was working with adults. Doris Rapp was working with kids. And she saw lots of kids that got labeled as, learning disabled, severe behavior disabilities, and it was due to these food reactions. So it's definitely worth trying to solve the problem. Anyway, some of it was due to pollution. It'd be to like diesel exhaust, things like that. If you can figure out what's hurting them, then you can protect them from it.
All right, and then so you are a practicing medical doctor. Like I said, you see all these images. You're very knowledgeable about all the things you discussed here in this video, and it sounds to me like what you're trying to do is you really want to help people. You want to tell them they should do everything they can because there are so many different pathways to hurting your mood, as you've described in this video. Try them all, right? You just try every single one, and then if you still have a problem, which you probably won't. Then you do something, right? In that order. I would think that's the best way to do it. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So like I gave over 50 mitochondrial inhibitors. I gave a bunch of common foods with allergies. I talked about a whole bunch of things that cause leaky gut in addition, basically about 100 things. And if like say my kid, now that I know all this stuff, if my kid was having a problem, I'd go for every single one of them and, try to help them. And the last resort would be a medicine. Maybe in some cases you need it, fine. But I would not go to that first because once you go down that path, you're never going to turn back probably.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. That's what I see. I see people that say that these folks have to be on medicine or pharmaceuticals, I'll call them, okay? Not medicine necessarily, pharmaceuticals, drugs, but I know they have never tried even a tiny amount of what you've suggested here today, much less all of it. And I think
I'm the one who figured out about the mitochondrial inhibitors. Nobody even knew that. I've got friends that are, PhD researchers, MD, PhDs. None of them knew about these mitochondrial inhibitors. There's not a single doctor that knows it. None of this. I was first in my class at like the best biochemistry medical student in the whole United States. I didn't know about it. Nobody knows about it. So that's why I write about it and teach about it. I read about all these books. I didn't know about these allergy things. I was curious to understand mental illness better. And so what I'm saying is all of this knowledge, a tremendous amount of useful knowledge, it is not in any medical book. And you could go to the chief of psychiatry at all the Ivy places. I will bet you none of them knows it. The reason is the way they make their money is match the yield of the pill, send a bill. If you make Big Pharma happy, they got big money. You make the insurance companies happy, they got big money. If you make the patient happy, who gives a rat's tail? The only thing a patient can do is say thank you. There's no money in thank you. It's nice to get a thank you. But what I'm trying to say is, like I said, in any deal, there's two partners and a chump, and the patient is the chump because the patient has no money. Patients are poor people. They never can reform the system because no one cares about patients because they have no money.
Well, you talked in detail earlier about the standard of care. I like the way you described it. I'd never heard that much detail, and it's kind of sobering the way you described it. All right, but what about the do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath?
Oh, that's a big joke.
It's a joke, okay? Because it sounds like harm. Everything you said that's part of the standard of care is going to do some harm. It sounds like to somebody's mood, right? I mean,
right. Well, like I said too, it comes down to the assumption of what is a human, and the unspoken assumption of the medical system is that the average patient is a stupid moron. And the reason I say that is because let's say standard of care is down here, right? And then what you really want is what I would call optimal care. Optimal care, though, is time consuming. To spend time with a patient and teach them. And first of all, doctors don't know the vegan diet, okay? They don't know epidemiology. They don't know nutrition. They don't know anything about these things. So, but to spend time talking with a person, that takes a lot of time. Yeah. The insurance companies are not going to pay you for it. The drug companies do not want that to happen. They will use their financial influence with the insurance companies, with the system in whatever way they can to make sure that doesn't happen. They want people selling drugs. And actually, I think the way the whole medicine system is structured is all based on drug dealing. Like, why are they replacing most of the internal medicine family practice doctors with nurse practitioners? Because they have a lower salary than the doctor. That way, they still sell the same drugs. They still go by the same standard of care protocols, but they get paid less. The system can only handle so much expense. So when you drop the cost of the provider, you still sell your drugs. And you can know it's coming. Everyone says, well, artificial intelligence is going to help medicine. It's going to improve so much. It's going to increase access to literature. BS. The drug companies are going to write the artificial intelligence programs, and it's going to say, give more drugs. And they'll probably go from nurse practitioners to RNs or something, or the patient will type their symptoms into a kiosk, and it'll say, science, take our drug. That's what's coming.
Yeah, that's not good. Well, you've given us hope, okay? And I'm very thankful for that, because I think that we're in a period of time where more people will learn this. It's going to be more of a grassroots movement. It has to be the way you describe it. But people they'll learn to take control of their health. They'll learn that they can avoid most all these mood disorders, it sounds like, because there's so many different pathways, right? There's so many potential things that people are doing wrong. Most people are doing multiple things wrong, and whether they're expressing a mood disorder or not, it's almost, it depends on many factors, I suppose. But if you have one, I'm thankful that you've given likely the solution here in this video. That's what I'm thankful for, and I hope that people will take your advice in terms of what they can do with good habits. That's what it comes down to, right? Good habits.
Yeah, there's always hope, and once you know about all this stuff, you got over 100 things to do to help you improve. And along the way, you keep learning and reading, and sometimes the condition is transient anyways. It's going to wear off. You just need time. So it gives people a much better chance to be cured without being lifelong trapped on pills.
Well, even better. So again, I want to close this video and just say thank you so much for transmitting this information out there. I mean, thank you for caring about humans, because we need more people alive that are like that. And I'm an optimist, so I see that once this information gets out there, that people are going to utilize it, and people are going to enjoy life more. And of course, the side benefit is going to be health span and longevity, right? Just better and better life, having more fun. And that's what it should be all about. And it's all possible thanks to you giving people hope like this who have, mood issues. So thank you so much. And I look forward to, more videos in the future.
Thank you.
All right. Well, have a great day, Dr. Rogers.
You too.